Are ready to do a valve adjustment on the ADV. I got the tub out. I have access to the top of the engine. We have to remove a few things in order to access that cylinder cover. So we are going to be starting by removing this. These are 8 millimeters. Just break them. And I think that's all. There's another one down here. You know, if you were asking why am I doing a valve adjustment, is my engine tight? And no, it's actually running really well. But it's about time that I actually look it up, because I think you're supposed to adjust it every 5,000 miles. I have 15,000 and the bike is riding perfectly. So there's this little tube here, put it off to the side, try to see if it's here's another bolt. I think this one is also needing to come out. This piece actually comes out. So to remove the air filter, we're going to have to remove this as well. But the procedure is it's the same for this in the PCX, and I bet it's the same specs as well. I'll put the specs up on the screen. On this is actually easier getting to the spark plug and actually having a clear way of getting the spark plug. Because if you recall, on the PCX, you couldn't have this tool in there. It was very difficult to get it out using the side door on the PCX. I had 15,000 miles on this thing, and I bought it with 10,000, and the bike actually runs really well, so I put 5,000. Don't know when the previous owner did the valve adjustments, but it never sounded like it needed it. And there's some things that happens when you need a valve adjustments. First of all, it will start to sound like it's got a little bit of a ticking, like an engine ticking, with valves being a little bit too tight. Increased fuel consumption, and also hard starting. But normally these bikes, they don't need a lot of valve adjustment. But that's kind of like one of the annoying things that bikes have, is valve adjustments. Now let's look at this thing. This should be much easier to do a valve adjustment because the engine is right there. If you guys can tell, there's the head of the engine. If you move the wheel, you should be able to get to it. Now this thing is a pain in the ass. And then this is also a pain in the ass. I haven't tried to adjust the valves on this. I believe they use a different system. I don't know yet. But on these, it's just like a lock and a nut and a screw. So it's much easier. So what you have here is this bolt, and you just rotate the engine. You could also move, see, it's hard to move the wheel. So you put a bolt in here and you rotate it until you get to top dead center. And you have another thing you have to do on the right side. So we're going to remove this, and this is where there's going to be an indication of the top dead center. There's going to be a couple of marks. And it's pretty universal for motorcycles. You have a side where you crank the motor, you move the motor, you spin the motor. And then on one side, you have an indication, a little T mark that you line up, and that's top dead center. Yep, so we have 8 millimeters here. We're going to remove this cover. And this is where the radiator is, on this side. So 3 bolts. Yeah. Look at this, quite a bit. Actually, it's a really tiny little radiator. So we're still not done. We have to remove a couple other things. Start by removing this. Right there. Down here. All you need. So let me show you this side. Well, it's kind of dirty. I should have cleaned it, but we have, normally you wouldn't just put something here so it's stands, so it's a little easier. Be able to push this out like this and look at this shroud, this fan. Right in here, this is what you're going to be looking at, and there's going to be these marks on the engine casing that you line up. So you're going to come here and you're going to do this until you feel some resistance. On the other side, you're going to look at the markings. Actually, when it comes off at top dead center, you'll feel it. So I'm rotating. Now there's some pressure, and then it's usually just a little bit. So in order to do this, you have to go to the other side and look at that. So let's go over there and see. So what we have here on the right side, there is a mark here on the case, and you line this up with the plastic bit. So right now it's actually kind of close. So I'm just going to rotate it. And you should be able to rotate it from here. You don't have to use a socket on the other side, but that's typically, if you have a larger motorcycle, you're not going to be able to rotate it with your hand just because it's such a large engine. But a 150 rotates a little easier. So you can move it until you line up the mark here. And here, there's some resistance happening because we're coming up to top dead center. So right here, the notch needs to go just a little bit more. Right there. We're going to have to move all of this stuff to get to the head of the engine, and that's what we're going to adjust. So we're going to remove this bracket right now. These are 10 millimeters. You don't have to remove the injector, but this way we can get to, and it should be 10 millimeter. Everything in a Japanese bike is 10 millimeters, it seems. Remove that. Remove this. Remove this. There we go. So that's that hose. So it's easier for you guys to see. And just put this aside here. A better vantage point. Oh, I hate it when I drop bolts. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull this hose out from here. You don't have to remove this one, but it does just make it easier for you guys to see. And that's really what I want. I just want to be able to give you guys a good vantage point. Start working on the head of the engine. These two bolts here, these 10 millimeters, that's one that's loose. Let's remove the other one. So loosen this one. If you follow this bolt down, you'll be able to feel the other one that's a little bit harder to get to. And you might have to use an extension or a wobble to get to it. So I might need a little bit of an extension for this one. Using one hand, I have it in that little hole for the spark plug, and then I have it the other hand here, and I have, this is where, okay, so that's loose. We have one more to remove, and this one should be fairly easy. So from this bolt down, it's going to be in the spark plug hole. So this one is like really simple to use. You see, I have my socket in here. Just fit it right through here. Carefully kind of pry it off. There we go. So that's probably the first time it's been removed. It looks like they put some gasket sealant. There we go. There. Yeah, this is definitely right there. The gasket is getting stuck. Make sure you don't rip that gasket. One of the things I had with the other PCX is getting the head off was kind of difficult. So it looks like they did have some gasket sealant on there, but it doesn't look too bad. It actually looks really clean. So we have a couple of sets of valves. You see that there? If you move it, it should be a little bit, it should have some play to it. But that is the intake valve. In valve adjustment, you have a couple of things that you have to keep in mind. You have an intake and then you have exhaust valves. The more cylinders you have, the more valves you have. So this one's got one intake, one exhaust. And with this huge port, you should be able to tell where that exhaust valve is, which is right here where my finger is, right there. And they use a nut and a little tiny little tip here where you tighten or loosen it. This one, what you do is, I'll put the specs for the feelers. This is a feeler gauge, and you basically put it in between here. There's like a little slot. All right, my 10 millimeter does not fit in there. You see, like, I can't really slide it in. So when that happens, you have these two bolts, or you have one nut. You're going to loosen this nut, loosen this. This is a 9 millimeter, which is an odd size, but you're going to loosen it. There's typically tools that you can use for this. I do not have that, so I'm basically doing this just with regular sockets. So I loosened this nut, if you notice that, and then you have a little tiny little thing you can actually kind of move with your finger. You don't even need a tool. So when it's too much, I'm just going to twist this top one. And the key is to not move. Here we go. There's some resistance right now. So you want that. You want to almost feel like you're sliding this in between a sheet of paper and feeling that resistance. And there is a little bit of play. It's not, I set it for, here we go. See, it's like, there's a little resistance there. And you just make adjustments using that. And you just tighten this nut just a little bit for now. And as I'm tightening, I'm always like taking measurements again. So I have my 10. See, it tightened a little bit, but it's still good. So we have the intake done. Let's move over to the exhaust. Using the spark plug cover right here, that's how you're going to access your exhaust valve, which is right here. For the exhaust, it tends to be slightly larger, the valve clearance. Just to show you guys, the exhaust valves are going to require a thicker gauge of the feelers. And what I like to do is put it at 0.22. I believe the clearance for the exhaust is 0.20 to 0.25 millimeters. So if you just get a 0.22 and set it right at the medium, that's a pretty good balance. Good. So the 0.15 does get in there. Using a 9 millimeter. All right, now it is loose, and I'm just going to twist that little tip a little bit the other way, counterclockwise. So I twisted it just a little bit. I'm going to get my 0.22. That's going to be my middle ground for adjustment. And I'm going to slide it in here. Hopefully you guys can see it. It slides in, but there's quite a bit of resistance, so I'm just going to undo it a bit. I'm starting to button up the bike, and I started the bike up. One thing I didn't mention is that the valve adjustment should always be done when the bike is completely cold. So I put everything together, and I started the bike for a couple of minutes, let it run. And the reason is I want to see if it was leaking out of the cylinder head cover. Okay guys, that is how you adjust the valves. And by the way, I did everything. I got the plastic all good. And then I was taking the bike off the stand, and I forgot that I didn't put the windscreen tight. It just flopped, broke like a big chunk of it. That windscreen belongs on my Ninja 250. That's why it looks like that. So I'll be putting the stock one. But yeah, the valves are done and the bike should be ready to roll. So let's start her up and see how she sounds. Of course, this bike is keyless, so let's do that. Really quiet, sounds great. So that's it. The valves are adjusted. One more thing, I just installed front and rear tires. The rear tire is already pretty worn. So I should have gotten maybe a different brand, but I do not like that I have to change that rear tire again. And I think for the next video, I'll be doing a belt and weight change because it's about due. 15,000 miles on this bad boy, and it's ready to start riding again. All right, guys, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.